Gotta go and get angry at all of my honesty. You know I try, but I don't do well at apologies. I hope I don't run out of time. Could someone call a referee? 'Cause I just need one more shot at forgiveness. I know you know that I made those mistakes maybe once or twice. By once or twice I mean maybe a couple of 100 times. So let me redeem myself tonight. 'Cause I just need one more shot at second chances. Is it too late now to say sorry? 'Cause I'm missing more than just your body. Oh, 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 is it too late now to say sorry? Yeah, I know that I let you down. Is it too late to say I'm sorry now? I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Yeah, I know that I let you down. Is it too late to say I'm sorry now? I'll take every single piece of the blame if you want me to. But you know that there is no innocent one in this game too. I go, and then you go out and spare the truth. And we both say the words and forget this. Is it too late now to say sorry? 'Cause I'm missing more than just your body. Oh, 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 is it too late now to say sorry? Yeah, I know that I let you down. Is it too late to say I'm sorry now? Not just trying to get you back on me. I'm missing more than just your body. Is it too late now to say sorry? Yeah, I know that I let you down. Is it too late to say I'm sorry? Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Yeah, I know that I let you down. Is it too late to say I'm sorry? I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Yeah, I know that I let you down. Is it too late to say I'm sorry now?
Well, hey, welcome to Crosspoint. My name is Kurt. We're so excited you're tuning in with us today for the next part of our series, People Skills. We're talking about leading and loving others better. Now, quick question. Have you ever had something that you thought was in your past come back to rear its ugly head in a current relationship, and you had to say sorry? Well, that's what we're going to talk about today, and we're going to look at where that stuff comes from. So we're so glad you've joined us here today. Now, it's your first time. We hope it's the first of many times. In fact, we'd love to connect with you. You can text this keyword, connection, to the number right here on the screen, and you're going to receive a link where you can give us your name, your email address, and we'll keep you in the loop on everything that's happening around here. And if this is your first time with us and you want to share your regular mailing address with us, we'll drop you a gift in the mail this week simply as a way to say thank you for joining us today. Now, if it is your first time with us, there's something I want you to know about us, and that is that we have an agenda here at Crosspoint. In fact, our agenda is to inspire you to follow God, in fact, to follow Jesus, but not just to believe things, but to actually do something with your faith. So if you're into that, you're in the right place, and if you're not into that, well, you're actually in the right place as well, because here's what we've discovered. Whenever we decide to begin to follow Jesus, it's going to make your life better, and it makes you so much better at life, and ultimately, it will make all of our lives better, our community better, and our relationships so much better, which is what we're going to talk about today. So we're glad you're here. Now, there's a lot of opportunities to connect around here, so here's the top 3 things to know for this week at Crosspoint. Number one, next weekend is Father's Day weekend, a little public service announcement for you. And what better gift to give to dad than to sleep in on Sunday? So we're throwing a special Father's Day after party after the early weekend service on Thursday, June 16th, featuring indie beer taps and some dad lawn games. Sure to be a great, great time. So whether you have big plans at the lake or the golf course, travel, sports, perhaps you're just planning to catch up on some yard work, we invite you to join us Thursday at the early weekend service and to stay for the special after party on that Thursday evening. Now, if Sunday's more your speed, we're going to have kolaches for everyone in honor of all the dads. You heard that right. Free breakfast kolaches for everyone on your way into the 9 a.m. and 10:30 service, along with the always fantastic Land of a Thousand Hills coffee that's changing the world one cup at a time. So next weekend's a don't miss weekend, and we hope to see you here. Now, believe it or not, we are just a couple weeks away from the 4th of July weekend, and we hope you find something to do or to light or to set off to commemorate this celebration of our country's birthday and the freedoms that we experience each and every day, primarily because of those who have given and continue to give of their lives in service to our country. And so, in light of the long holiday weekend, to show our appreciation for all the incredible volunteers, the leaders, the staff who serve each and every weekend here at Crosspoint, on the 4th of July holiday weekend, we are not going to meet for in-person services. We're going to have all of our services online and on demand. And we're going to open that on-demand window at 6 a.m. on Sunday, July 3rd. All that to say, we're not going to be in the building that weekend to give all of our volunteers a break. Yeah, I know. We're a little excited about that. Now, for those of you who don't volunteer, we need you. We really do. In fact, that's our third top thing to know. Did you know that you were born to be a part of a heroic team? In fact, it's kind of cool that about 90 to 95% of what happens around this place runs on volunteers. Big-hearted servant leaders who are ready to do whatever it takes to make the world a better place. And so regardless of your skill set, there's a place for you to plug in and to play on this world-changing team. So go to crosspointweb.org/volunteer and we'll help you get connected with a volunteer team here at Crosspoint, or you can let us know on your connection card. And as always, big thank you to the many of you who do serve around here on one of our teams and make this place go, as we often tell you, we can't do any of this without you. And big shout out to those of you who fuel life change through the Joy Box. And this is a place where we fuel generosity and change lives one life at a time. So thank you. All right, we got a great service today. So excited you've joined us. We've all experienced it. Something happens, it hurts us, we think we're past it, and then all that bitterness on the inside of us just comes out. So we're going to figure this out today. Let's head to the venue, and we're going to get started with a great, great scene from Daddy's Home 2. Take a look.
Well, on that note, welcome again to Crosspoint, and thanks so much for joining us for week 4 of this series, People Skills, a guide to loving and leading others better. I don't know about you, but I have been loving this series so far. I think it's so helpful because, let's be honest, like we just saw, hopefully a little less exaggerated in our real lives, but relationships can be weird. We could all use a little help in navigating them. And just like the characters in this scene that we just saw, all of us have ways that our experiences, especially our experiences with our family of origin, have shaped us and developed in us a unique temperament. And so over the last couple of weeks, we've been talking about these temperaments and how they impact the way that we communicate both what we say and what we hear. Now, before we go any farther, we want to give a big welcome to those of us that are joining us online this weekend. We are so glad that you are here. And I want to introduce myself in case we haven't met. My name is Abbie. I'm the interim CSM director here at Crosspoint, and it's been so awesome for me over the last several months to jump in with that team and for my family to find our own place to belong here in this community. We love it here. So thanks for the way that you have welcomed us, and I'm excited to get to be in this spot for the first time in this place today. So if you've been with us over the last several weeks of this series, one of the things that we have been talking about is the importance for us in recognizing that there's often a gap between what we say and what others hear. This is something that happens often in my house, not just because I have a husband, but also mostly because I have a 4-year-old son. This is my husband, Brock, and my son, Roman. Last weekend, as we were celebrating a baby shower, we've got a baby girl that's coming in just a little over a month. And I don't know how much experience you all have with 4-year-old boys, but they're not exactly known for their communication skills, and it's fine. They're just learning. And so we have these moments all the time where there are gaps between what Roman's trying to say to us and what we're hearing. And one of these happened a few weeks ago. He and I were riding in the car, and he really wanted me to play a particular song for him. And so I was trying to figure out what song he was wanting, but the problem was, here were the only 2 clues that I had. Number 1, it was a song that he had heard one time in his life. And number 2, in the music video, there were 2 boys with pants on, and the rest were girls in what he called cool shorts. Any guesses? I had no idea what song he was wanting me to play, and I grew frustrated as he got to the point of being nearly inconsolable as we were trying to figure this out together. And then finally, thankfully, he said, "Mom, it's the song where you go like this." The Macarena. Who would have guessed? And as I watched the video after I pulled it up for him, I was shocked. He actually had described the music video with pretty amazing precision for a kid his age, who had literally only seen it one time months prior. But despite the clarity of his communication, there was still this gap between what he said and what I understood. This is not just true with kids, though. No matter how old you are, communication is not as easy as we sometimes assume. But it's worth working on because our words have tremendous power in the lives around us. Over the last few weeks, we've spent most of our time looking at ourselves, looking at what does it look like for me to take ownership of the power that my words have in the lives of those that I love and lead. And so today, we want to kind of flip it around, look from a little bit different angle, and instead to talk about what does it look like for me to take ownership of my own healing after situations where other people's words have wounded me or have failed to meet my needs. Why? Because this is an inevitable reality of life. All of us have moments where we encounter people who don't consider the power that their words might have, or who don't realize how what they just said may have landed for you. Even those of us that work really hard to try to be intentional with our words, we all have moments where we don't get it right. And so every one of us has experienced what it is like to be wounded by the words of others. This reality, I think, is extra obvious to pregnant women because, if you don't know, people say the most ridiculous things to you when you are pregnant. I want you to imagine, if you've never experienced this yourself, what it would be like for you to go about your life and virtually everywhere you go to have people comment on the size of your midsection. Or maybe if you've got really rockin' abs and that sounds fine to you, whatever part of your body you're like not so secure about. It's a really fun experience. My friend recently had a woman who got on an elevator with her, and she looked at her and she said, "You got 2 in there? You look wide." And my friend responded, "Thank you." In case you're wondering, it's never a good idea to tell a woman or any person that they look wide. There's a free tip for you. But there are other times in our lives where there are words that are said to us that aren't as easy to laugh off, aren't there? In between when my son was born and this pregnancy, we walked through a series of miscarriages, and during that time, so many people would say things to me like, "Don't you think it's about time for your son to be a big brother?" Or, "Are you trying yet?" And they had no idea. They had nothing but kind intentions. They didn't see the wounds that those words exposed in me. We aren't all wounded by the same words, but we all have words that have a way of sticking with us, whether the person who has said them has intended for them to sting or not. And so what we're talking about today is really important for all of us. And I'll tell you, in my own life, it's been something that's been really crucial, especially over this past year. But it's not something that I necessarily would have previously identified as something that I really needed or a weakness in my life. See, I'm generally a person that has pretty thick skin. My friends often joke that there's nothing you can say to offend me, and sometimes my husband and I will catch people off guard with how blunt we are as we talk to one another, because that just works for us. And I realize that doesn't work for everyone. We all have different levels of sensitivity, but regardless of what that is for you, the truth is every one of us has some words that have a way of sticking with us. And we have to make a decision. What are we going to do with those? How are we going to respond when we have those conversations and encounters? So what we're talking about today, much of it probably won't feel like new information or a new conversation, but I think it's an important one for us to regularly reflect on. Because as a beloved mentor of mine that I think many of you know, Ann Smith, has often said, we don't learn and forever know. You only really possess what you continually rediscover. And so we hope that might be true for us, some of us today. If you're around for the first 2 weeks of this series or have jumped into one of our small groups, then you've already heard this verse that we're about to talk about from the book of Ephesians that in many ways has been the foundation of this whole series. In Ephesians chapter 4, verse 29, it says, "Do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouths, but only what is helpful for building others up according to their needs, that it may benefit those who listen." Now, so far, we've focused pretty specifically on this verse and this helpful filter that the writer gives us to think about the words that we are saying to others and the impact they have. But the writer actually isn't finished. There's more to say on this topic. And he continues with this instruction in verse 31. Get rid of all bitterness, rage, anger, harsh words, and slander, as well as all types of evil behavior. Now, I think this part was written in response to exactly what we're talking about tonight. To those moments when we have to decide, how are we going to respond? When words are spoken to us that aren't helpful, that tear us down instead of building us up. See, much of this list, rage, anger, harsh words, really it fits more in the category of what we talked about last week, as Kurt led us to consider what is inside of us and how those kinds of things come out of us in our responses when we are in moments of conflict, when we bump into one another. And if you missed last week or any of the previous weeks, I can't encourage you enough to go back and catch up. You can find all of those sessions online. But today, where I want us to focus our attention is on this first part, on the bitterness word. Because bitterness falls in a slightly different category. Bitterness is a longer-term decision that we make, and its effects linger far beyond the moment of the conversation. Bitterness is tricky. It has this way of growing slowly, silently, beneath the surface. And it starts with a feeling of being justified, often for good reason. But it ends with feeling like a version of yourself that you never wanted to become. At the root of bitterness is often an experience in which you had valid reason to be hurt. But when we either don't deal with those valid feelings by pretending like they're not there, or when we linger in them for too long, we find ourselves headed down the path toward bitterness. Maybe you find yourself starting to struggle to even be in the same space as that person. Or you find yourself surprised by the way that totally unrelated encounters have a way of triggering that moment and bringing up past hurt. The truth is, no one sets out to become a bitter person, but it happens all the time. And unfortunately, it blows my mind how common bitterness is actually among Christians. Because, see, for those of us who call ourselves followers of Jesus, we should be the experts at getting rid of bitterness in our lives. Because it is a practice that is so central to the way that Jesus lived and the way that he invites us to follow. See, Jesus, of all people, had every right to harbor bitterness and resentment. He had this group of friends that he had poured his entire life into. But at the moment when he needed them the most, they dipped. When he was arrested and executed, many of his friends scattered in fear. They pretended like they didn't know him. Some were with him. We know the women and some others were with him at the cross. But there were other disciples who just mere hours before had promised him, "No, we won't betray you. We would never leave you." They were nowhere to be found. I love John's account of Jesus' first interaction with these friends after all that went down. After the resurrection, Jesus comes to this place where the disciples have been hiding out in fear. And I can't help but wonder what they expected was going to happen next. See, they had seen Jesus call people out in some pretty direct ways before. I wonder if some of them thought that that was what was coming for them, if they were expecting a reckoning. But this is not what happens. Instead, Jesus says nothing about what they have done to hurt him. And instead, the first thing that he speaks over them is peace. He reminds them of who they are and this mission that he's invited them to join. And then he tells them to forgive others who wrong them. I love how Eugene Peterson's message paraphrases this part where Jesus asks them this question: if you don't forgive sins, what are you going to do with them? Jesus is coming and he's modeling for his friends. Listen, in moments like this when you're hurt, you've got two paths you can choose from. You can choose to forgive, or you can choose to hang on to that bitterness. And if you go this way, what will happen is that it will continue to wound you and to impact the other people around you. The writer of Ephesians says it this way: just after that instruction we read a moment ago to get rid of all bitterness comes this description of what it looks like for us to follow the example of Jesus. Be kind and compassionate to one another, forgiving each other just as in Christ God forgave you. Again, for those of us who call ourselves followers of Jesus, this is absolutely central. When we are unwilling to forgive, we are living in a way that is wholly incongruent with who we say we are and what we say we're about. But what we're talking about tonight, this is not just good advice for Christians. This is about a better way for all of us to live. And so if you're here tonight and you're really not so sure about this whole faith thing, you're just checking things out, we're so glad that you're here. And we hope that you will also find this conversation to be something that can be helpful for you in your life as you seek to love and lead people better. I love the way Andy Stanley defines forgiveness and how it connects specifically with our goal in this series. He says, forgiveness is giving people in our past what they don't deserve so that we can give the people around us in the present what they do deserve. If you were here at Crosspoint for Easter, you may remember that day we were given a Sharpie and invited to write the word impossible on our arms. which, by the way, was a really fun and convenient day for me to decide my 4-year-old should come to service with us instead of going to his class. And he was armed with Sharpie and Pop Rocks in his Easter outfit. Mistakes were made that day. But despite that distraction that I was dealing with, it was a really meaningful day for me. And you may remember how Kurt had, after we had written that, he was encouraging us to name some of the things in our lives that feel impossible. And as in the midst of that moment, I found myself suddenly in tears, but not for the reason that other people around me may have assumed. See, in that moment, as I looked at that word on my arm, I had this realization wash over me of how much God had mended in me over the course of the past year. See, a year prior to that, I sat in a different Easter service, and I couldn't see past some of the pain that I was walking through. And every day, I was growing more bitter toward God and toward other people. Looking back, I can see how that bitterness, how that lack of forgiveness was hindering me from being the kind of person that I want to be. It was holding me back from loving my family well, from loving my friends well, from being the kind of person that I long to be. I don't know your story or where you find yourself as you sit here and listen to this today. Maybe you are currently facing a situation where forgiveness just seems impossible. You wouldn't even know where to begin. Or maybe you're in a really different place than that. Maybe as you're thinking about this, you're like, you know what? I can't really think of anyone in my life that I need to forgive right now. That's great. Regardless of where you might find yourself on that spectrum, I think there are some steps that we can all take that will help us both to root out any bitterness that might be within us, but also to protect ourselves from getting down that road again in the future. The first step that I think that we can take goes along with a lot of what we've been talking about, is to consider your own communication habits. Now, if you've been a part of one of the I Said This, You Heard That small groups, then you've already been in some conversations talking about how each of our temperaments has both innate needs and some unique tendencies to manipulate when those needs aren't met. But regardless of whether you know your color or agree with what the book says about your color, I want us all to think for a moment about the way that we tend to communicate when we've been hurt by someone else's words. What's your go-to? Do you lash out? Do you get silent? Do you say too much? Or do you say too little? See, some of us need to know that saying only what is helpful for building others up doesn't mean that we avoid ever saying anything that's hard for someone else to hear. If we want to protect ourselves against bitterness growing in our lives, then we have to figure out how to communicate in healthy and open ways. I was having a conversation with one of my friends about this recently, and specifically about some ways that she's learning to communicate differently with her husband. She told me a story about how they were at the pool, and it was time to get their kids out of the pool and ready to go. And so she's, drying them all off, and she looks over, and her husband's just sitting there. And immediately, she is like, what in the world is his deal? And then she starts to think about all of the times before that he hasn't been helpful with the kids in the past. And she started to resent him. But then she remembered something that she had read recently, and she decided, you know what, I'm going to try this a different way than I normally would. Normally, I would hold on to this. I would just let it go, be silent about it, never address it, but I'm going to have a conversation instead. And so later that day, she brought it up to him. And when she did, he was totally caught off guard. He said, oh my gosh, I am so sorry. I didn't even realize that you were drying the kids off. See, I spent about 45 minutes while we were there trying to figure out how did they construct that pool. which the moms who were listening to this story were like, you gotta be kidding me. Like, who would ever? But my friend had this moment where in that conversation, it opened up this whole new possibility. She realized that some very simple communication in the moment at the pool would have changed how that whole interaction went down, because he was never trying to avoid the responsibility that she had assumed. See, often we can avoid the path to bitterness by breaking out of the communication habits that have not served us well in the past. Maybe for you, that means sharing more with the people that normally you would hold back from. Or maybe for you, it's the opposite. Maybe it's starting to practice, you know what, in that moment when I just want to say the first thing that's on my mind, I'm going to stop and I'm going to wait until the emotion has passed and have the conversation a little later. Of course, you know, when I think about my friend's story, unfortunately, it doesn't always work out that easily, right? Sometimes we encounter people whose temperaments are so different from our own that even when we do an amazing job at communicating openly with them, we still might struggle to get on the same page or to understand one another. This used to really bother me as a yellow who wants approval and wants people to understand me, until I started to see every conversation, every interaction as an opportunity to learn. For me, this actually started with kind of a random podcast in which Rob Bell was talking about how we all have North Stars and South Stars in our lives. Maybe you're familiar with North Star people and moments. These are the people in our lives that as we watch them, we're like, yeah, that's what I want to be. I want to emulate the way that they handled that situation, or I want to be more like that person. But we also have South Star moments and interactions, things that rub us the wrong way, people who we work with or live next door to or happen to be related to who regularly say things that sting us or just don't sit well. These are South Star interactions. And they actually have as much potential, if not more, to guide us as those more positive interactions do. Both of them are rich opportunities for us to learn and to grow. And this has really been a game changer for me, especially in some trickier relationships in my life. See, when I start to replay that hurtful conversation, instead of stopping with, I just can't believe they would say that, I take it a step further and reflect, what was it about those words that really impacted me? What can I learn from that moment that will help me to communicate better in the future with that person and with others? I got to tell you a secret. Those moments, not only are they rich learning, they may be in ways that we didn't expect. See, those people that regularly say things that don't sit well with you, it may be that they are not as different from you as you would like to believe. Maybe they are reflecting back to you some things about your own temperament and tendencies that you tend to avoid and you don't want to see. So, in those moments, when the door starts to crack open toward bitterness, get curious instead. Reframe the conversation and look for what you might be able to learn from it that will help you to lead and love others better. Remember that you are the one that's responsible for your own healing, not them. And every experience we have is an opportunity for us to become more whole and more fully the people that God made us to be. The third thing that I think can help all of us root out bitterness in our lives and protect ourselves against bitterness from the future is to keep short lists. After we became parents, Brock and I, one of the things that we really had to wrestle through, that we kind of found ourselves fighting about on a regular basis, was negotiating how much time we should spend away from home, away from our new family. And it was easy to start to grow bitter about feeling like we didn't have enough time with friends or feeling like we weren't equally sharing the parenting load. And so one day we had this idea. We were like, what if we just keep a log? And so we got a whiteboard and we hung it up in our bedroom. So it was the first and last thing that we both saw before we went to bed and when we woke up in the morning. And we just started logging the hours that we were away from home. You may not be surprised to find that this was not a helpful solution. This did not solve the problem, though it did open up the conversation. You're probably smarter than we were. You probably don't have a literal log that you keep. But I would bet that you have some mental lists. That maybe there are some lists of wrongs that you find yourself revisiting, especially when you're interacting with a certain person. Maybe kind of like Mark Wahlberg did in that clip we watched a moment ago. A couple of years ago, I went on a summer trip with some high school students and leaders, much like the trip that some of our CSM students are getting ready to go on to San Antonio for the International Youth Convention of the Church of God. And during that trip, we had this moment where we decided to try something kind of wild. See, leading up to that week and in the early days of that week, there was a lot of conflict that was brewing among our group. There were some relationships that had really been broken, and they were having trouble getting on the same page, and we were seeing bitterness start to grow and take root. I had heard recently about a church tradition who has this practice of once a year when they come together, instead of doing kind of their normal thing that they do together, they would have what they would call forgiveness services, where every person in the room would face off with every other person in the room, and they were given a phrase that allowed them to ask for forgiveness for any harm, intentional or unintentional, that they had caused the person that they were looking in the eye, and then to offer forgiveness to that person. Now, this was very out of our norm. This is not something that our group was used to doing, but we decided to try our own version of it, knowing that it might be a flop. But to my surprise, it was one of the most beautiful things that I have ever experienced. To look around that room and to see students and leaders bravely and vulnerably offering one another forgiveness that had been long overdue, realizing it wasn't too late to say sorry, mending things that had been broken for far too long. It was so moving. And it's an experience that I often think back to, that reminds me of the power of keeping short lists and of regularly making a habit of offering and extending forgiveness, of asking for forgiveness when that's what we need to do. As we get ready to wrap up today, first of all, don't worry, I'm not going to make you stand up and do that in this space today. But I do want to invite you to think about your own life and your relationships and to consider what is a next step that you might take in a new direction. Is there a place where bitterness has been coming out in your words or in your behaviors? Is there something that you've been holding on to for too long? Are you finding that your past is preventing you from giving people in your present what they need? How long's your list? Do you have a list that it's time to let go of? There's so many ways today that we might decide to take a next step. And in fact, if you have something on your mind, we hope that you will share it with us as part of your communication card. Maybe for you today, it's deciding, you know what, when I get home or when the next time I'm with that group of friends, I'm actually gonna try that thing that you just talked about. I'm gonna be bold, and I'm gonna ask for and offer forgiveness and invite other people in that circle to do the same. Maybe for you, a next step is choosing to be a student first and a critic second in your interactions with your friends, your family, your spouse, your partner. Or maybe for you, as you've been kind of wrestling through this, you're realizing that you can't give what you haven't received. And maybe today is an opportunity for you, for the first time or the first time in a long time, to say, you know what, God, I want to receive the grace that you have for me so that I can offer it to people around me too. Before the band plays this last song, I want to pray for us. I invite you to stand if you'd like and join me. God, these things that we have been talking about today, this is hard work, and we need your help. We need you to help us see the things that we have been ignoring, the ways that bitterness is growing in us that you want to root out before it continues to grow. God, would you give us the courage to take the steps that we need to take to deal with those places in our lives? And God, I think specifically of those in this space or watching online who maybe as they think about bitterness, what they're realizing is, you know what, my bitterness really is directed toward you, God. I just can't get past those things that you allowed to happen in my life. I don't know how to deal with that grief. As we get ready to sing this song in just a moment, there are going to be some words that say, God, you never let us down. But the truth is, God, sometimes we feel let down by you. And so, God, I pray for my friends that they would know, if that's true for them today, that they are not alone. And that as these words wash over them, as they listen to them, God, that they might begin to hear them as a promise that you are a God who holds us in every moment. That your promise to us is far greater than what we might see or feel. And so we invite you to meet us here, to show us what we need to see. Amen.
You're never gonna let me down. 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 Sing, you're never gonna let. You're never gonna let me down. 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 Let the King of my heart be the mountain where I run, the fountain I drink from. Oh, he is my song. Let the King of my heart be the shadow where I hide, the ransom for my life. Oh, he is my song. You are good, you're good. Oh, 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 let the King of my heart be the wind and shine my sails, the anchor in the waves. Oh, he is my song. Let the King of my heart be
All right, man, it has been so good to have you join us today. I hope you lean into that promise this week, that you have a Heavenly Father who will never let you down. And as always, we hope that you found this helpful today. Now, if you like what you experienced today, like us on Facebook, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and you won't miss any of the action. Also, don't forget to hit send on the connection card because we would love to hear from you and respond to anything that you need this week. And if you'd like prayer today, you can text the keyword need prayer to the number here on the screen, and a member of our prayer team will give you a call sometime later today. Hey, we hope you have a great week, and we look forward to seeing you next time for part 5 of People Skills.
Good.